Thank you, sir. We are able to connect with Mr. Mark Nowacki. Let me take the privilege to introduce you to Mr. Mark Nowacki. Mr. Mark hails from a small town. He was a chess prodigy and for some years was one of the strongest chess players of his age in United States. At the age of 12, he worked with the Marine Biology Group at Springfield College, for whom he wrote embarrassingly simple software to help with data analysis and taught laboratory techniques to postgraduate students. His first book, Programming with Paradox, was published at the age of 16. After starting his university career at Wharton Business School, Mark decided to switch to the eminently more practical study of philosophy. Now, let us hear from Mr. Mark Nowacki.
Now muted.
Good morning, and my apologies if things get a little bit noisy out here. Again, I did regret the circumstances that kept me from being able to attend in person. However, I am very grateful for this opportunity to share. I also want to say I would very much appreciate the opportunity to thank Prof. Jayaraman for his magnificent talk that was shown immediately before this. Oh, forgive me, it seems to be a little bit odd to clarify whether I'm being heard. Okay, sorry, I'm in communication with your server room now. Okay, good. So now that that's all together, allow me to just mention a few things. I was asked with Dr. Nitin to talk about the future of education. And I think that this is particularly relevant to young management professionals, because I come with what is either very good or very bad news for you, which is, unfortunately, you will never be able to put your education behind you. It will always be there. And what I mean in particular is this. Think about the world we live in terms of the changes you're seeing in your own lifetime. So, for instance, you've seen tremendous changes even in the cell phones you use, or the technological changes, which are so very visible. There are also the social changes, which, of course, are also going to be different. I think that the way people wrote love letters once upon a time, as referenced by Dr. Jayaraman, has changed somewhat. And I think that I love you expressed over Twitter doesn't have internet that allows a flat earther nonsense to really take hold, right? This was not a problem before. So what I'd like to point out is that while our world is changing, as educators, as those involved in education, and everybody at the end of the day is involved in education, not just themselves, but the people around them, we could have the challenge because of to adopt Dr. Raman's terminology. We have a problem of a mindset. We have a problem of a mindset. We make certain assumptions about what education is like, and in making those assumptions, we cut ourselves off from solutions. We overlook them. So let me point out what I think is the deepest problem of responding effectively as educators and learners to the world. And that is our mindset concerning education is that education is inherently reactive, not proactive. Let me sort of explain this using a framework that was introduced by a previous speaker. Let's say I want to talk about known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. We didn't really talk too much about unknown knowns, and I'll come back to that because I think that's the important one for us. First of all, known knowns. These are things we know, and we know that we know them. So in those cases, what we're dealing with is the artifacts of traditional education. Basically, we know the multiplication table, and in consequence, we know it, and as educators, we assume that most of our work, in fact, for some of us, all of our work, is to focus within the known or the known known. This is what led to, for instance, the emphasis upon rote learning, about mastering a body of facts that would allow us to be able to navigate the world around us and meet the then current technological demands for positive and educated workforce. Because please remember that education is often pursued, or at least socially justified, for reasons extrinsic to the basic human good of learning. We, once upon a time, focused in educational relationships and on educational content that was related to religious instruction. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, you will see that there was a shift away from the types of facts that had preeminence within the educational sphere. So we started learning all sorts of facts that allow us to be more effective in working in factories or as becoming people who are able to execute increasingly complex instruction. And that's where matters rest. And intellectually, socially, I suspect that most teachers remain within that particular set of objects of teaching, the known knowns. Then, what I would like to point out that there's the second class, namely the known unknowns. Okay? The known unknowns come in two different flavors, as you will. For those which are going to come something quite reasonable. You wish to predict the way that some particular technological innovation is going to impact climate. The problem is that fundamentally new ideas, the ones that might be thought of as being the most disruptive of ideas, are precisely the ideas that until you have it, simple example would be try to predict the impact of computers on current business. If you go back to 1920, 1930, really there was no way of predicting fundamentally what kind of social changes would eventuate from these different devices. And yet it'd be hard to think of a change which has had greater impact on our world of business than the advent of IT. Now, the thing is, if you cannot know something and you know you can't know it, you have to take certain steps to deal with it. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And then just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to deal with the first item that Dr. Rama mentioned, namely the unknown unknown. And this really, as was pointed out, is truly the world of the researcher. You can look to Dr. Raman for the sort of curiosity, the intellectual curiosity and willingness to explore throughout your life that really will get you there. So you have a good example. And what I think instead, and is that there's only so many of us who can function at that level. So I refer to the fund of the politics on this particular issue. And come back to the the known unknown. All right. We know that technology is going to change. Some of those changes will be predictable. Some of them will not. So, for instance, not so long ago, people were wondering how are we going to see the unification between telecommunications and on one hand, and on the other hand, the idea of computing. And we finally got our market solution, which was at the time the iPhone. And we basically saw the arrival of a new smartphone, as we call it. That's sort of predictable. It was one of the options on the table. It could be a solution coming from either the communication side or the IT side, but you knew it would come somewhere. But these fundamentally new ideas, like, I'm going to invent the wheel, or I'm going to invent something that nobody's seen before, that we cannot know, but we do know that we will have to react to it in an effective way. Now, as educators of ourselves and others, what I would like to suggest is that we need to move beyond the perspective of focusing on known knowns. They'll always be there. Focusing there is wrong for us. And rather transitioning to the idea of focusing on providing our learners and ourselves for the known unknown. What do I mean? Now, known knowns basically evolves into facts. Like, I know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. I know that Thane is outside of Mumbai. This is something that, these are known facts. And the problem is, going forward, that facts are cheap. Facts exist in replete abundance on the internet. If you or I don't know a fact, what do? We pull out our cell phone and we ask Mr. Google. And Mr. Google inevitably points us to Mrs. Wikipedia, and she knows everything. Okay? It's like having a wife in your pocket. And so the idea is that facts are easily discoverable. And you should know something immediately that is a consequence of this as a business person. And that is where everybody has access to the same resources without any significant cost. Those resources in themselves are not going to be as valuable as they once were, perhaps when they were more scarce or harder to get. Everybody can use Wikipedia. Everybody can use Google. And that means that the facts that we can get to no longer differentiate one from another. If you, as a learner, wish to remain competitive and relevant in the world that's coming, in fact, not even coming, it's already here, then it's absolutely imperative that you find some way of differentiating yourself other than mere disciplined, factual knowledge. That will not allow you to flourish. And of course, in any career, just as you saw in the lovely spider diagram from PricewaterhouseCoopers, the thing is, yes, we do assume some sort of technical or base factual knowledge relevant to a discipline. If, for instance, you're going to be an accountant, then you should have some familiarity with the tax code. If you're going to be a doctor, please know a little bit about the medicines that you prescribe. Those are facts. But beyond that, you need to have something more, right? Because we even have WebMD, right? We have doctors and, as it were, automatic diagnosticians. The people who have done accounting know that the world of accounting has changed forever due to the presence of things like Xero or any of these online accounting systems which have rapidly transformed what was once an arcane discipline into what is closer to what you might think of as simple bookkeeping. And the problem with bookkeeping is that it's, again, rapidly being turned into pure data entry. And data entry can be done by monkeys. In fact, not even monkeys, machines. Why? Because, as they say, you can actually even automatically upload receipts into Xero. Just take a picture on your phone and boom, up it goes. So it's amazing to think about, and it's wonderfully convenient, but it means that the whole profession of accountancy is gravely endangered at the bottom level. At the expert level, of course, we need theoreticians, we need people who are experts in accountancy. When you have to talk about matters of interpretation, we need forensic accountants, we need many, many things that, do really come out at the intellectual frontiers of the discipline. But the mantle type level, it's no longer the demanding discipline in terms of time and hence employability that it used to be. Okay, so we know that doctrine is coming as a problem, but it's already here. That problem besets law, and problem besets all sorts of other professions. Any profession which has built its reputation and its social prominence on the importance of mastery of the domain of fact has basically run directly into computers as the substitute for the human. This is a real problem. We have machines not because they are worse at doing the job than a human being. We have machines and build them because they're better. Where's the principle of So let's know. I now come back to unknown. Excuse me. I'll tell you, it's confusing terminology. I agree. We come back to the known unknown. We know that we have to deal with that. We know that we have to deal with these areas where we cannot predict what's going to happen and we need to remain relevant. So, what do we do? Well, I think there is one more typically overlooked resource that we have. I think the answer is something that we already know, but we're not aware that we know. Here I'm talking about the unknown knowns. The unknown knowns. Basically things that we don't know we know. And let me give you an example of this. I'm wearing my spectacles right now, and typically I'm not looking at my spectacles. It takes a special kind of effort for me to be able to look up and see, oh, okay, there's the edges, and I have to really take it off and look at it directly like this in order to be able to inspect and see my spectacles. Because by and large, throughout the day, my spectacles are not that which I think about and know the world. They're rather that by means of which I think about and know the world and see it. So it takes an extra step to get ourselves back and see whether or not our spectacles, as it were, really are there, and even harder, assess whether the spectacles are working properly or not. If our standard of what looks right is our spectacles, how do we examine our spectacles? By knowing I have my spectacles is one thing, but I tend not to be aware of it. So it's an unknown knowing. The solution to the problem of the upcoming known unknowns, like disruptive technological innovations, lies in giving us, ourselves, and as learners and as teachers, lies in giving us our disposition, our virtue, our skills that are most general and widely applicable across the range of human life. Certain skills we know are useful no matter where, no matter when we find ourselves. For instance, communication is a clearly relevant skill for the business person. Again, problem solving, such as was eloquently described earlier. Problem solving and creativity and creative problem solving. These are things that we can practice and get better at. So what I'm thinking of is the following. What we really need to do is to focus on skills which are going to cut across the most domains. And you could see an excellent example of this in the preparation that Dr. Roman worked through with his grandson. In particular, note that we have a systematic development of generalized problem-solving skills. The young lad is an engineer. And he is being now given new skills, new knowledge of PwC that is going to allow him to find financial application of those skills. It's really quite an amazing story if you think about it for a minute. Because what's important to the future is not the degree certificate. It's not really about you have a particular educational qualification in this or that. Rather, what's important is a very simple question and how being able to answer, meaning, what can you do? Can you do it? Since you and I are in a position of always needing to solve problems we've not encountered before, it makes sense, taking a step back, is that we always have our critical thinking skills, our intellectual spectacles in place. We always have to have the right attitude of being willing to try different, novel, creative solutions that have not been put before. And finally, we always need to have the basic good character that allows us to collaborate and work effectively with people across all domains, all borders. Those of you who may have heard this before, I remind you that there is a general name for all those skills. They're called 21st century skills. And I've talked about them many times before, but basically they boil down into this. You have situational intelligence, which is going to be an ability to solve problems. It's all about making the decision. Then, the next facet, collaborative intelligence. You have the skills that are necessary to allow you to work effectively with the person sitting next to you. So that would include things like emotional intelligence as well as basic communication skills. And finally, the fruit, which is going to be the result of all of that, is going to be global intelligence. Do you have the skills, the attributes, the features of an effective global citizen? First, you have the good character. Are you reliable? Are you trustworthy? Because if you're not, quickly you will find that you will be unable to work consistently and well with people across borders. Because with regards to reliability and trustworthiness, frankly, without that in place, there is going to be no collaboration with the man. And all cultures present. It's an absolute must for the international world religion. Then, among the virtues you display, you have openness. Are you willing to work with people from other walks of life? Finally, if you're working with other people from other walks of life, are you willing to draw upon your own talents and the talents of others? Sometimes leading, sometimes following in order to get things done. When you're comfortable with that, then you truly are a global citizen. So in conclusion, because the world is going to be throwing new challenges from the realm of the known unknowns Adam, and also the unknown unknown, as educators responsible for the cultivation of learning in others, as simple human beings who are responsible for cultivating our ability to get on with life as individuals, we have to draw upon common sense that we don't know we know, which is develop those particular 21st century skills, the unknown knowns, communication skills, situational intelligence, and global intelligence that allow us to be effective lifelong learners so that no matter what disruptions come, we are able to respond effectively and well. And that's the end of my talk on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, sir. Let me introduce to our Director General, Dr. Guru Prasad Murthy, who would be launching the theme of next year. He is the founding director of Dr. V.N. Brems in 2005, and since 2008, he is the Professor Director General at Dr. V.N. Brems, a former Professor Director of Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai, and the Principal of R.A. Poddar College, Matunga. Dr. Murthy comes with a global academic background and has also worked in the aviation industry outside India from 1994 to 2001. An eminent management expert, scholar, and noted authority in finance and contribution to management authority in finance and accounting. He has won several national and international awards from his contribution to management from time to time. Sir, I invite you on dais to speak a few words about Srujan and next year theme of conference.
Dignitaries on the dais, good thing because people have started appreciating the journal, and the younger generation feels that they should be a part of it. And I think teachers are scouting for young budding authors who may have a role to play in future insofar as contribution to management is concerned. So please give a big round of applause to the teachers who have worked for this editorial team. And of course the leadership under the stewardship of Dr. Redekar, leadership of Dr. Nitin Joshi, and the overall mentorship of all members of the editorial team. This has seen the light of the day, and I hope this work will continue with greater force and improved quality and quantity from time to time. Thank you. And we declare this as release. Dr. Joshi, release. Our effort since 2005 and even before I joined here has always been to announce the seminar for the N+1 year in the nth year. Since the chief just quoted some formula, I thought of using little algebra. Every year we announce the theme 1 year in advance so that mentally the teachers are prepared. While one particular theme is out, another theme is in, and they have to be active at it. Even before the old theme is over, a new theme is on the mind. The theme for next year is changing scenario of rural economy, role of research, innovation and digitalization. The rural sector or the whole economy is in a different mood, as you saw from time to time, or as you are seeing from time to time for the last several months. And yesterday you must have seen the survey, economic survey. You would have also seen different channels presenting different views of the economy. And today I think the budget must be on, the live budget must be on now. Insofar as we are concerned, as a management institute, this proposition is to ensure that the management movement and the management tools and techniques and state-of-the-art of management is taken to the rural sector. We make an assessment as to what is the nature and scope of the management movement present there, and whether as a management institute through this seminar and through all that's going to happen because of the literature study, because of the research that is going to happen, whether we can make a small impact on this theme and contribute to the knowledge in the rural sector. We would first like to assess what's happening there. We would like to see to what extent the modern technology in all its format is having an impact on the rural sector. And the editorial team has prepared some kind of agenda and sliced it into appropriate segments. One is agriculture and rural development, opportunities and challenges, economic and social aspect of rural development, and there is a long list here which includes, amongst other things, rural healthcare, rural private sector development, migration, skill development, employment in rural areas, and so on. It's a long list. We have to slice it in a narrow niche so that we are able to do due justice to the whole thing. Otherwise it's a too broad a theme, more of a PhD kind of an exercise on the rural economy. We will have started work very soon, in a month from now or even earlier, and hope that next year when we are here, we will be able to see the research work that is done via Srujan, via the precursor workshop, and via the annual seminar. It's a tall order, but nevertheless, that's what BRIMS always does. Takes up a challenging topic and tries to slice it appropriately and bring it to students, teachers, and other members of the management fraternity in a neat format so that they can study and improve the knowledge. That's our contribution to the knowledge economy. So we declare, Dr. Joshi, this topic as announced for the ensuing year, and we will all work towards it. Am I right, Dr. Jappe? We have started the work almost through this brochure. The last thing is to just say a few things about our chief guest, Mr. Jayaraman. When he delivered his speech at the Thorle Bajirao Hall, a similar kind of speech on the occasion of the convocation. Dr. Joshi, Principal Venkatraman, he is gone, he is not here, and myself were met again to decipher the inputs that he had provided and see how it concerned management. And we had to call a professor of physics also, so that we are on the same wavelength as the speaker. And we made a one-page note for our understanding as to what he said then. And we thought for a topic like today's, the EduFuture et al., we require a scientist, a nuclear scientist kind of a person who has within him, ingrained in him, inducted in him, what is called as the scientific temper. In the same room, we had a seminar on scientific temper for all our heads of institutions, when Dr. Agarkar was also there and a few other scientists were there, because we want to bring scientific temper into the process of teaching and learning, so that all that you said, the 5 mind effects that you said, are there. We have philosophical mind effect, engineering mind effect, management mind effect, we have scientist mind effect, we have legal mind effect, and we have a wide variety of other mind effect, because we have people from different disciplines. We have philosophy, literature, sociology, and the like. But ultimately science, mathematics is the queen of science, and science is holding the world either at ransom or is for the benefit of man. Bertrand Russell said, science is meant for man. But today I find man is meant for science. Because if I don't say control, alt, delete, the computer doesn't work. But if I take a Colgate toothpaste home, I can open it and use it when I want. So that's the difference between science and technology. If I tell the lift, go to the 2nd floor, only 2nd floor, but somebody else has placed something else, he will obey that instruction first. And then, yeah, fortunately here we have only 5 floors. But in Singapore, if you do that, it's 40 floors sometimes. And that's where I think science has not delivered as much as man would like to have, but maybe man is over-expecting from science, I don't know. I may be an odd person to comment on that, but as a customer, I am not very happy with the kind of thing, because when I get a letter at home saying, this is a fixed deposit, this is a computer-generated statement, and does not require your signature. What if I give a check, I say, this is an electronically derived check, please pay me 50,000, a check, signature is not required. They asked for 3 signatures. And I have complained about this from the Forum of the Computer Society of India. I am a life member there. I was the chairman of some session, and people only laugh at it, but then that's the impact. So digital signatures and all are very dangerous. That apart, the kind of lecture which he gave, the lessons for us, for students particularly, is how the knowledge flows if you're involved in it. The scientist in him came out, as you saw, and it was as if that he was in his own world as a scientist and giving us ideas. And that was almost partly human and partly celestial, because it was part of his personality, part of his DNA. And that's how we thought he should be the right person for today's seminar. And what he spoke may have gone above the heads of many from the scientific point of view. But when he came down to management, it should be very clear that those 5 effects, the 5 scientist mind effect, is one of the take home for teachers, that when syllabus is framed for the future, we should see the subjects which are drawn into the syllabus, and the details of those course content should follow those mind effects or many more, which may be required to bring about a holistic concept of management, along with the skill sets that Dr. Joshi said. And now that one of our colleges is going to be autonomous, we have a greater freedom to bring about these kinds of changes in our syllabi, so that we really prepare people, not for 2020, maybe for even longer. And that's the unknown unknown. In a lighter vein, Socrates had said about people, there are 4 types of knowns and unknowns. Those who know not and know not that they know not. Those who know not and know that they know not. Those who know and know not that they know. And those who know and know that they know. The first one, those who know not and know not that they know not, you have to shun them. They are fools. Those who know not and know that they know not, they are simple. So तो साधा माणूस आहे, त्याला काहीतरी शिकवा. दोज हू नो अँड नो नॉट दॅट दे नो, त्याला माहिती आहे पण माहीत नाही की त्याला माहिती नाही. So that's that's what he was saying. You have to awaken them. They are asleep. They know and know not that they know. That's why students are here. We said it's all there in you. And that's what Mark was also saying. People know, but they know not that they know. And last, of course, those who know and know that they know, they are the wise people, follow them. But what Mark said is very important. Those who know and know not that they, and know that they know. That's all known. If dy dx of sin x is cos x, okay, and dy dx of cos x is minus sin x, it's known. What is there to teach in that? Today google.com will tell you. Same thing, if variable costs and fixed costs are defined in a particular way, it's known. So I don't think syllabi should concentrate on that. What Mark was saying was, that's all known, so people will have access to Google. Worldwide, there is no differentia specifica between people. That, which is unknown. Unknown, known, unknown, unknown, and many other permutation combinations. Just for your information, in our management course, we do follow some of the science that you have said. We do know that formula alone cannot drive decisions in our syllabi, and therefore there is a course on general management where we say that decision making starts where the formula ends. Next, we feel that the moral effects, the Harvard School model, we feel is the most important. Peter Drucker's research has also shown 3 things are very important: character, morality, and discipline. And here too, we follow what Swami Raghunathananda of Calcutta used to say in a paper on ethics of modern corporation, that the 2 most important things for decision making are rectitude and righteousness. Just last 2 weeks we have experienced the last 2 points that you mentioned. Elasticity and flexibility of leadership. While I may be a Professor Director General and he is a Professor Director, we are now in the process of rejuvenating our vision and mission statement. And there we ask the teachers to choose committees and also choose representatives, including ourselves. We raised our hands. We were there in that committee, but not as Director General, Professor, or 50 years experience, though they may perceive it that way. I was there as one of the karyakarta, a follower, and whatever has to be discussed. Elasticity and flexibility is key, and that's what the management course tries to imbibe in the students. And last but not the least, much to the displeasure of the teachers over the last several years, grammar is more important, because the beauty of a letter lies in its grammar, lies in its micro impact, and lies in the details that constitute what is supposed to be beautiful. Unless you see the details, you cannot really enjoy the beauty. And that is to the displeasure of many. But then those who want beauty would only go for that. And recently we had an experience of teachers who were very open here. They wrote something on a book which we are bringing out on startups. And we thought that the grammar has to improve, not the English grammar, the grammar of the management science itself. And Dr. Joshi, myself, and a few senior teachers took a decision to go back to them and said, this is the dotting of I's and crossing of T's, and the overall grammar which would give us a better outcome. So there is a little bit of science here, because in this room itself, we had eminent scientists like Dr. Agarkar, Dr. Kerkar, and others who have helped us to build a scientific temper into this alma mater. So I'm very proud of that. I thought I will take 5 minutes in articulating this to you and also give you a very big round of applause. I request the students to please stand up and give the scientist here a big round of applause. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Joshi, for giving me these 5 minutes, because I thought it would be inappropriate if I don't appreciate it, because he accepted our invitation wholeheartedly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to introduce our next guest, Mr. Dilip Kulkarni. Mr. Dilip Kulkarni started his career in 1979 in Tata Engineering and Loco Company Limited, now Tata Motors Limited, in process planning. After 11 years, shifted gears and went to sales territory management in Goa, MP, and UP. He is also certified information security auditor from ISACA Illinois, again shifted to shared services internal for SAP online audits and streamlining of shared services. ensured the rollout of Sarbanes-Oxley process documentation and audit for New York Stock Exchange listing of TML, completed the streamlining of user authorization project in SAP, completed the SOX audit for year 1 and 2, shifted to IT as Deputy CISO, left TML in 2014, started independent consulting in SOX and internal finance controls for medium-scaled companies, visiting faculty to IIM Indore since last 5 years for advanced selling skills and sales management. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Dilip Kulkarni on the dais.
Am I audible? Before I start whatever I have prepared for you guys, let me introduce myself slightly differently. I am more of a person who's flexible in doing things the way I find it correct, ethical, and absolutely to the betterment of my organization. I learned mechanical engineering 25, 30, 40 years back. I did my master's in management. In those times, we didn't have these BBAs and MBAs. We had only that PGDBM. Didn't use it exactly the way people thought I would use it. Suddenly in 2003, opportunity came. I did my CISA. And again, what you learn doesn't mean that you use it for your career enhancement or you use it for your benefit. What you do is you increase your knowledge base. Use that knowledge base somewhere else. I was expected to do systems audits with my new knowledge. I didn't use it. I used it 4 years, 5 years, 6 years later when I went into my organization's IT department. A very small person in front of eminent people, eminent scientists, and I myself feel that I'm more sitting in that side of the audience than in this side of the audience. The reason why I took up the visiting faculty role 5 years back, that again landed into my lap. Sincerely, it landed into my lap because of very funny rulings or guidelines of the organization. IIM said that you ought to be a double graduate, a management graduate to teach in our organization. The earlier gentleman didn't have that. So my colleague, who was again in a business excellence assessment, asked me, Dilip, can you teach? I said, gentlemen, I have never been on a dais ever. And he said, no, doesn't matter. Are you an MBA? I said, yes, I am. So come down. And 5 years back, the journey started. It's very surprising that I could muster enough courage to stand on a dais like this and deliver not one, but 20 sessions in a row. I didn't know what to teach. What I taught or what I exchanged, what I shared, I don't teach actually speaking. I share my understanding, I share my knowledge, I share my experiences. I have never been a scientist like Jayaraman. I have never been an educationist like Dr. Joshi. I have been a simple person trying to push my trucks into a market where I had 92% market share. God willing, nobody ever would have that, I'm sure. Today, the Tata Motors market share in my territories is not more than 60%. Lucky me, absolutely. But then when I look back, the things that I picked up from those were the things I share with my student fraternity. The first lecture when I speak to them, I tell them that I'm not here because I know something different. I'm here because I have experienced something different which I'm going to share with you, which you people will be using in your furthering of your careers. So let me begin this with this small note, because quite a few things which I have collected, which I have thought about, have been shared by Dr. Joshi, Mr. Jayaraman, and I'm not such a great creator of PPTs or such a creator of presentations like this. As Dr. Gurumurthy said, if you can Google, I can Google. And well, this is something part of that. So to start with, China has a workforce which is 26% in agriculture. Japan has a workforce of 3%. But when you look at India, we have 43%. These are 2018 figures. But in spite of that, look at where our managers are. We have sincerely gone into managing most of the organizations, most of the world's organizations, single-handedly. I don't want to name names. Forget about Indra Nuis and Satya, Nadellas of Satya, Microsoft and all that. The second generation, the people who are going to come up from bottom now, are you people who are going to be there. And I'm sure 5 years down the line, there would be another Microsoft equivalent or a Infosys equivalent in India. And that will be fueled by managers like you. And that is the basic requirement of our education today, what we are sharing with you. I'm not creating any new knowledge. I have accumulated 40 years of experiences, 40 years of mistakes that I have done, and 40 years of mistakes does collect a lot of mass, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. So we still an agrarian economy, but having a cutting edge technology base also. This is what I was talking about. We have a surplus of manpower, surplus of technical manpower, and that is where we are going to be helping others to benefit. Today we are probably at knowledge producing education, or maybe internet-enabled education. As Dr. Joshi said, we would be having lectures here, or maybe I will be creating a lecture as Mark did across the seas somewhere else, and you students would be sitting somewhere else and accepting that lecture, accepting that knowledge, accepting that information at your pace, not at my pace. When we studied all these things, we used to sit in a class and our teachers would come, deliver and go out. The next period, another teacher would come and go out. Today, I am sure half of you people would be shifting classrooms rather than shifting teachers, right? That's how it works. So maybe we are talking something different. This, of course, Dr. Joshi collected and created a very fantastic slide. I'm really sorry about a plain, simple slide here. But what are you people? Let's look at this. Connected? How many of you spend more than 5 hours on a mobile? Most of you. 10 hours probably is an exaggeration, but if you look at the first liners here, I'm sure they won't be spending more than 30 minutes on a mobile phone. For me, a mobile phone is an instrument that connects me vocally with another in the person. We, our generation, have seen the transition from a fixed line telephone to a mobile phone to a video phone and I don't know what. Some years back, there was a radio, radio program where one of the eminent or one of the known celebrities was talking about, what do you talk of how would you define a telephone 25 years down the line? What it would be? And that lady said, no, there won't be a telephone there at all. All I have to do is think or maybe say, connect me to Dr. Joshi. And well, Dr. Joshi's hologram would be standing in front of me talking to me. These are imaginations, these are innovations, these would be happening in your time, not in my time. As Bob Lutz from Ford or General Motors, he says, things will happen. 15 years down the line, there won't be a driving license. Why? Because you will have autonomous cars. Why the hell do you need a driving license? In that case, road rages will be a thing of past. In that case, what would happen actually is things available at the drop of a hat, which we never thought of. That is the reason why we bought a car. That is the reason why everybody here in this room has a car, maybe 2 cars. One for you, one for your spouse. But 15 years down the line, believe me, as Dr. Tony Seba of Stanford says, for him, in a developed country, the turning point is 5 years down the line. He says 5 years down the line, nobody will have a ICE, internal combustion engine driven car. Nobody will have a driver's license. I don't know whether it's true or not. But let's talk of you people. You have a mindset that technology can solve everything. Does it really? I don't think so. We have still an issue here because that is the reason why we are interacting physically, sitting face to face, talking to each other. You are the generation who engage with each other, collaborate with each other much more than we ever used to do. 17% of you want to have your own business. We never thought of it. For me, it was one CV, one interview, one company, and 40 years of career. Ask Dr. Jayaraman, probably his also is the same story. Ask this gentleman, he also has the same story probably. But for you, as Dr. Jayaraman said for his daughter, I told my daughter, you should never have a company for more than 3 years. Every 3rd year you have to change the job because the current company, whatever is able to offer you, whatever information, whatever knowledge, whatever skills, whatever tacit knowledge they were supposed to give you, 3 years is time enough for you to learn that. To progress, you got to have a different type of skill. And the next company is going to give you that. Please ensure, this is my personal advice to all of you here, all the students, 3 years is the only thing that you should be in a company. Now let's look at this. Artificial intelligence, Google, Alexa, Siri. Do you really feel that is AI? I personally feel it's not. It's basically a beautiful way of putting a audio interface on a basic structure which was available all the time. I used to feed it from my PC. Now I feed it from my mobile phone. Next time I feed it with my voice. Nothing changes. But what has really changed is that with this artificial intelligence, you and me have made our life comfortable. Today when I was driving from Pune to this place, I didn't know where this place is. All I did was tell Google Maps, find me this place and give me driving directions. You can't think of driving any other place or think of doing something different without a Google assistance. Or for that matter, let's go back to my generation. When I joined in 79, we used to write letters to everybody on a piece of paper. Now if you go to make 3 copies, you put 3 carbon papers. Today what do? You don't do that. So it doesn't mean that computers have made you redundant. They have made you more efficient. That is how I look at it. And finally, if you really look at the super AI, the thing which Hollywood has kept on bombarding you guys, I hope most of us have seen that Robin Williams movie, Bicentennial Man, where that gentleman, where that scientist gets a robo, converts it into a physically looking man, puts smiles, puts mental abilities, and finally at the end of the movie, that person is given the status of a human being. But when you really look at it, that is probably, as the learned people say, it's about a century away. So let's not worry about AI. Let's worry about our own understanding of AI, and let's worry about our own future. But when we really look at it, these things, these improvements, these changes in technology are going to make a lot of jobs redundant. Like I said, driving license is not going to be there. What else? Probably a doctor also may not be there. Dr. Gurumurthy said this. But then I personally feel a doctor's knowledge, his tacit knowledge, will never be replicated by AI. AI will be able to assist him, no doubt about it. But the final call has to be a human call. It cannot be a machine call. You can create artificial intelligence, you can use that and make a lot of improvements in your skills. You have robotic knee surgery, but that doesn't mean that only robo and you are available in the operating room. There is a team of doctors standing by and actually operating that robotic arm. It's not necessary for you to get scared about all these things. They are not really as intelligent as we call off. But a few professions will not lose. They will not lose their jobs. Who? Teachers. Like it or not, if you really feel that an Alexa sitting here or a robot standing here giving you a lecture is going to be the way of imparting knowledge, sharing knowledge, I wouldn't say imparting knowledge, sharing knowledge, I think we are all mistaken. We still have a role to play. The fraternity here has a role to play to share that knowledge, to share that experience, to give you that personal, empathetic connection with the real world. Today, you are all ensconced in this place, protected by the organization, protected by a lot of economic barriers in between you and the real world, which the day you land into your job, probably 15 days later, probably 6 months later, probably 1 year later, they will be started removing. You people will be talking to businesses, talking to people, and your managers, your seniors will be positively depending on you and entrusting you with decisions that will move or make or destroy organizations. I hope most of you have heard the story of Nick Leeson, right? Nick Leeson was a trader on Singapore Exchange. This is probably before your times, I don't know. 1984-85. He brought a great bank called Bank of England down. Barings Bank had to buy it. One person making $800 million mistake is something which you people should be scared of. But then we, the teachers, should be able to give you that confidence and that ethical base so that you people are able to take decisions correctly. What AI can do? It can automate your jobs. It can automate your assessments. Yes. Why did we get into multiple choice question answers? Because the basic reason is that machine can read it. One dot here or one dot here. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all. But the thought that goes behind that is the thought that I and you together put together. And that is the way AI is going to help you in this generation, your generation, probably 10 years till now, from now. What it cannot do is, it cannot give you an empathy. You can't cry on a steel shoulder. Sorry, still. It can't give you skills. It can't give you communication, though the earlier slides said that active listening is out. Me being a salesperson for 10 years, me teaching sales, I take at least 3 classes on active listening just to emphasize on the base that until unless you talk to the person facing each other with direct contact, eye to eye, you will never be able to understand the non-verbals. And non-verbals are something which are very strong, very, very potent, and very, very informative. That communication, active listening, is going to be there, like it or not, today, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Interpersonal skills. When you talk of interpersonal skills, talking about people and talking about this, we talk about a global village, right? When we talk of a global village, we should be able to talk about interpersonal skills. As Dr. Jayaraman said, global connectivity. How do you handle your Chinese friends? How do you handle your Spanish friends? How do you handle your American friends? And we Indians, surprisingly, are much better at this. Globally, Indian managers have been appreciated for handling interpersonal skills much better than their Chinese counterparts, much better than their American counterparts. And I'm not telling you this from a bookish knowledge or a information coming from Google. It's my daughters who work with Tesla or who work with a company called Decathlon in France, that they tell me. Both my daughters, one in France and one in US, they tell me that their counterparts in America or China or France look with an awe towards them. And looking at my age, I'm sure you will be able to appreciate how young my daughters would be. So, analytical thinking, social media. How many of you are on Facebook, WhatsApp, and all those things? Everybody. So how do you manage, how do you connect with social media? How do you utilize social media to further your career, to further your company's business? That is one of the things which you and I would be looking at when we are talking about our own management skills, our own skills. Language skills. How many of you know more than 7 languages? 5 languages. 4 languages. I had a friend in sales who knew all 23 languages of India. Believe me, all 23 languages of India. Except there is a small caveat here. He said, I knew only 3 questions in each language. That is the icebreaker. How are you? Tumi kashe ahat? Channagidira? Had your food? Út aita? Jevan zhala ka? Khana ho gaya? And how's business? Dhanda theek chal raha hai? Kya chalo idhar? These 3 language questions in their native language are the best icebreakers ever in the world. Try them. Forget about business. Try them personally. And you will find a different connect with a person. I have tried it. I know at least 7 languages in all these 3, only these 3 questions, nothing more than that. Because I was in UP, I was in Goa, I was in MP, so I know those languages. Global operating, of course, people have spoken about it. So how would this education 4.0 look at? You have millennial mindset. You have a human longevity. My father retired at 57, 58. I left company at 60. You guys, I'm sure, will be working or at least active in business or whatever career you have till 70, 75. Look at Dr. Jayaraman, he is still at 74 working. So I'm sure dying will be an option and working will be a necessity. Your career starting at your age of 25 will go till the age of 80. 100%, rest assured. You will be active, working and productive till that time. So how do we ensure that what skills we impart to you today, what knowledge we share with you today, what information we pass on remains relevant? You are going to build on that for the whole of your career. That is what is going to spur this movement. Future skills, I don't even know what they are. I didn't know when I came out of mechanical engineering, Jabalpur Engineering College in 79, what IT was. We had some, no doubt about it, but then being an information security auditor was a skill I collected in 2003, 25 years later. But then still, I didn't know that it existed that time. So you also will have to be a continuous learner in your life. Crowdsourcing, did we ever think that by making an appeal on internet, Facebook, Twitter, wherever it is, you will be able to garner something like $100,000? Unheard of, at least for me. But it happens now. So, how to handle these? And then looking at these things, collaborative platforms, big data analysis, all these things, technical disruptions, the most important thing that is happening today. What would be the next technical disruption we will have? Probably the electric vehicle. I don't know. 20 years back, when my friend was doling out or carting out his solar-powered water heating systems, he used to say, by 2020, oil will be depleted and there will be zero oil, so buy solar today. We are in 2020, the oil has not depleted, oil is still there available and in abundance. But the thought process has changed and we are shifting into renewable energies. Why? Because, as I said, we will require 1.5 Earth today. So let us try to reduce that to maybe 1.25. Though, again, sustainability, even on the solar side, has a different connotation. Because what really happens is, you have a life for that lithium cell or you have a life for that solar power cell. What happens at the end of the life? How do you take it back to the earth? Are you not going to contaminate earth just because you have this? Or those bulbs out there, as Dr. Jayaraman said, there is some mercury sitting there. Is it not going to contaminate my earth back again? Am I leaving this earth a better place for the next generation? So the trend which we'll be talking about will be deep customization, time, place agnostics, of course Dr. Joshi talked about. We're talking about deep customization. When Henry Ford created his famous assembly line, there was no customization. He said to his assistants or his engineers, when they came up with a different color for their Ford Model T, he said they can have as many colors as possible as long as they are all black. But when Toyota brought their customized assembly lines, you can have first color as red, second as white, third as blue, fourth as black. And automation was so beautiful customization was so fantastic that they did a deep customization for giving benefit to each and every customer. Today, what we have here in education is basically what Henry Ford created, an automated, connected transfer line. But probably 5 years down the line, what we will have is a deep customization. Each of you individuals talking about, learning about what you want rather than what I want to tell you. You might come back to me asking a few questions. How do you handle this? How do you do that? And I will be, with my imperial or my earlier experiences, be able to tell you that this can be done in a way or this may not be possible in this way. So that deep customization and choice-based learning would start happening. Evaluation would happen, it's not examination. We are the product of examinations. We were taught for a full year. End of the year, whatever was here, we put it on a piece of paper and our invigilators, examiners examined it. I tell my students, we are the people who are responsible for what you are here today. We never had a midterm exam, we never had a quiz, we never had a project, we never had anything like surprise test or no weekly test. So then we realized that this is something wrong. We got to test our pupil, we got to test our students, whether they have realized what we wanted to share with them, whether they have understood. And that is the reason why we came out with a weekly test. That is the reason why we came out with a quarterly test. That is the reason why we came out with a project. Of course, whether it is really meeting the end result, getting the benefit, is a question. So it's not going to be an examination at the end of the year, it's going to be an evaluation. I'll give you a very simple, very, very old example. When I was in class 8th, 1971, 70, 71 sort of, I was in a good school, no doubt. We had a teacher whose relations were coming over to India from US for a full year. Now the student there was also my compatriot sort of, class 7, class 8 student, and he was going to miss the school for a year. The teacher out there said, no worries, we will ensure that he learns something there when he is sitting there, doing nothing. So that teacher asked, what is the family that you're going in? So the mother or father told that we have a grandfather, we have a grandmother, we have uncles, we have aunts, and everybody is there. So the teacher gave the student a very simple task. You have to write the biography of your grandparents right from the day they realize that they are there to today. This is your assessment for the whole year. Submit that project and I'll get you in the next class. Can we think of something similar here? I don't know. We'll have to look at those things. You guys will be talking to peers, you will be talking to mentors. It's going to be demand-led. What you want, we'll provide rather than what we want, we'll provide. It's going to be a lifelong learning, more of emotional quotient rather than intelligence quotient. Faculties more as mentors and facilitators. I never teach myself. I never take the role of a teacher. I can't. Even though I used to teach my daughters at home, I could never be in that role of a teacher. I can't dictate things. I can't. I'll share, I'll talk, I'll make understand, but I'll not be able to talk to you the way typically a teacher talks about. I'll not be able to give you that Newton's laws are this and this is cast in stone. We might experiment on that, but I will not be able to teach you that. But the role is going to be different, naturally so. assessments will be different. So how do you change this knowledge transfer? How do you change this knowledge sharing? We talk about sharing knowledge through life experiences, number of life experiences. I mean, if you really talk to us, you'll realize that our knowledge or our experiences are the basis on which people ask us to stand here. It's not because I have spent 40 years more than you on this earth, but because I have made 40 years of mistakes and learned from them. Every mistake is a way to learn. Every mistake is an avenue for you to change your tack, to tackle a problem differently. That is why I'm standing here. That's the only reason I can tell you. Elucidate the niche. Give anecdotes. My classroom is never dull. I keep on telling stories. And in my parlance, my business excellence parlance, stories are not stories, they are called anecdotes. I'll give you a very funny anecdote here. Business excellence, Tata Motors. When Tata Motors bought a commercial vehicle company in Korea, we tried to do business excellence for them. Now, the way is at the end of the assessment, it's not an audit, it's an assessment. We understand them, we talk to them. And once the assessment is over, we give a feedback session. In the feedback session, the leader stands and does a presentation like this. And the first slide, leadership, came out with 2 words, change management. Now, when I listen or when we talk of change management, it is managing change. Unfortunately, the gentleman there, Korea, took it literally. And the moment the words flashed on the screen, the MD of the company said, "Do you want me to resign?" No, we are talking of managing change. Second time, one more slide came up. It talked about employee engagement. Again, the MD stood up and said, no, we don't permit this in our company. He was talking about personal relationships between 2 employees rather than engaging employees with the management. So, a different connotation, a different thought process, a different language. So that is the reason why we all should be talking about how we behave. Emphasizing a nuance, give a live demonstration. Removing doubts, absolutely, because every time there is a doubt, you either keep quiet or you switch off. It's my job as a facilitator to ensure that whatever doubt, whatever smallest doubt you have in your mind, I should be able to clarify or raise my hand and say that is not in my knowledge domain. Let us explore together. It's not necessary that I am omniscient. It's not necessary that I am the wiki of this world. No, I also have blind spots. I also have a knowledge deficiency. So let us explore together. Sharing skills, expanding boundaries by challenging hypotheses. This is exactly what we all do here, isn't it? That's what I feel. And then by seeding ideas and watching them grow, debating, discussing, and developing and deliberating. How do we create knowledge? I collaborate with you. I collaborate with Doctor. I collaborate with Dr. Joshi. I talk to people. I talk to students. I talk to specialized people. If I need to understand how am I going to use this slide projector, I need to talk to the technician. I understand that. And making this knowledge available to you people. This is how we do it. Do we need support from government in all these things? Probably, probably no, I don't know. Because though we are going to be an autonomous organization, would that be comfortable with the organization or the legislature, or no? We need to talk about it. Probably there would be a UGC who would be talking about that you cannot teach your students ABC, but you can teach your students EFG. Or in case you're talking about, Mark was sitting somewhere else and we were talking, sitting here and listening to him, the technology. How would the government manage the technology? That is how it will be looking at. And finally, creating ethically challenging areas. Stem cell research, gene splicing. I mean, people are saying that whatever is happening today, the coronavirus, is just because a laboratory got exploded. Something happened there. And this is the outcome of that. I don't know. You don't know. But then, whether it is ethical to create a coronavirus, whether it is ethical to create a gene splicing, or whether it is ethical to create the future smarter people by gene splicing, is a question of ethics. And unfortunately, legal and legislatures are far too away, and the science is far ahead in all these things. We still do not have regulations to manage the drones, and Amazon is ready with their drone deliveries. How are we going to handle? Our aircraft rules, aircraft laws are much, much archaic, somewhere like 1800s, 1700s. But unfortunately, we are not there. Finally, I'd like to leave you here at this point. Whenever you have a technology, it goes up, but the education keeps lagging. This happened in your industrial revolution, but when the education caught up, prosperity happened. Today again, you have a digital revolution, and the industry is going to be up. Are we there to handle this situation and change the way we deliver, share, exchange, and create new knowledge? Is a question with which I would like to close this. Thank you.
Sir. Now I would request our Director General, Dr. Guru Prasad Murthy, to come on the dais to give a token of appreciation to Mr. Dilip Kulkarni.